All right, all right, all right. Welcome to the Stiletto Talks, where we are committed to creating collaborative safe spaces for women of color. My name is Paula Johnson Hutchinson, and I am so excited today for you all to learn more about the guests that we have today. Starting in November, we are really intentional about showcasing women who have used their personal stories or maybe stories within their families, stories from their lived experience in general, and turning them into books. Often, this is a way to kind of get that pain out or to help someone else to reach back, if you will. So, yes, the recording is live. So, if you are live, yes, you are seeing us in loud, live, and in color. And if you are online and you're listening to us on iTunes or wherever that may be, Amazon, yes, we are in it. So, today I am pleased to talk to you all with the author of Roaring Resilience, Adrienne Spires. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Paulette. I'm happy to be here.
Good, good. We're about to get right into it. So let's go. So this title, Roaring Resilience. How did you come up with that title?
So it's roaring resilience, finding grit and alliance in. I am a survivor of domestic violence, and I'm also a non-defending parent. And when I was in my victim stage, I felt like I was just locked in this lion's den. My ex-husband made me feel that way, trying to figure out a way to get out of there alive. And it was a challenge when the abuse began. And so I just felt like I was screaming all the time internally. But I knew I needed to have some resilience to make it through and get up out of there. Yeah. So it was like I was doing two things at one time, sort of like an oxymoron.
But I'm loving this title. And now that we have some background on the why behind the title, I think that many of us have experienced domestic violence in some way, shape, form, or fashion, whether it's verbal, whether it's physical, whether it's a family member. And one thing that you talked about was your life and about survival. Those are key words that often ring out a lot when we talk about DV. Um, how did you find the strength to take this and go from now that you're out of the situation and decide to turn this into advocacy? Because often we find that some they just don't want to talk about it anymore. But you have penned a book to help others. And so you're taking your pain and you're taking control over it. So tell us a little bit more about how did you get to the place where you say, you know what, I want this to be, I'm going to control this in the form of advocacy.
Well, I have several reasons behind that. But I've been working in the gender-based violence field for a long time, for, maybe 10 to 15 years, probably a little longer. But just seeing maybe within the past 5 to 7 years, Black women, our numbers have been spiking when it comes to domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and homicide. And our young ladies, our numbers when it comes to teen dating violence are increasing as well. And I was just like, my sister and I was having a conversation, and she was like, you really need to tell your story. And then one day, I'm here in California now. I'm originally from Illinois, from Champaign, Illinois, by way of Chicago. And she shared with me a story of a young lady that was sexually assaulted by a young man that was recently released from the county jail. And unfortunately, the young lady unalived herself, and her mother wrote a story in a community newspaper asking the Black church to talk more about sexual assault, mental health, and suicide. And I felt compelled to write a blog about that because I was living in Champaign-Urbana, maybe like 2 hours south of the suburbs where she lived. And the name of the blog was The Apology. And I felt like I needed to apologize because working in that field, I didn't talk enough about it outside of work and the circle of my friends or my network. But also just thinking about, as Black women, our numbers are really high when it comes to that adverse category. And I just think that we need to have a conversation in our community. How are we going to come up with some conflict resolution strategies and tackle this?
I love what you talked about when you said conflict resolution strategies. And then you talked about reaching back and definitely empowering our young girls. When we think about it, because again, many of us are, maybe I'm probably aging myself, but of course, Gen X, whoop whoop for one time for Gen X. But often when you would hear these stories, sometimes it was told almost from a place of comedy, or you heard that,
Mhm.
oh, that's just how they are, and everybody kind of was very passive about it, even though they knew that the situation was really passive aggressive and even taboo, because you mentioned the church, and the church can get really in a space of neutrality when it comes to DV, but we all know that it impacts people. And yes, church people have they experience DV.
Yeah.
Um, and so you have that spiritual part, and then you also have the physical healing that needs to take place so that you're able to function in society.
Mhm.
But I want to ask you, why do you think it is that in 2024, our community, and specifically Black women, why is it still almost taboo for us to not tell our stories when it comes to DB?
I think it's, I will say from my personal experience, and then I'll also share the professional, there's stigmas and stereotypes when it comes to us. And as a Black woman, we're not the perfect victim. And also in our community, we tend to protect our Black men and our Black boys because of the history that we have with the criminal justice system. I know with my ex-husband, I didn't want the community to know what was going on. I didn't want anyone in our business. Um, I was 26 years old and a mother of five. And they were all five of the children were my husband's children. But, you know, in our community, people say, oh, it's like, girl, 26 and have five children, and not wanting the police at my door, hoping that we could rectify the situation among ourselves. And then professionally, just looking at Black women, it's quite different looking at other women that are victims of domestic violence. Um, and sometimes we're criminalized. And when the police come to our door, it's a little different compared to the way they go to the doors of other women from other ethnic groups and nationalities.
You brought up some amazing points. And when I think about it, Adrienne, I'm thinking about you decided to share your story of transparency. You have put it out there. And so the book is out. So that means that others can read it. What is one thing? Because I know that people are going to probably take it and dissect it and all those things. But what is the one thing as far as the awareness of DV in our specific ethnic group and gender group? What is the one thing that you feel like you want people to take away from the book, no matter what their other opinions are?
I want people to be just as concerned about the victim as they are about the perpetrator. A lot of times we hear a lot of talk about the perpetrators, um, but we don't hear a lot about the victims. And I want perpetrators to be held accountable. Yeah. Because they will say, even still today, what did she do? How could she have done something differently? Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's a learned thing, because, we
Mm-hmm.
were taught if we could just behave, maybe
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't anger them enough to strike us or to hit us, or um, dragging us out of bed, or hitting us in front of our children, or whatever that may look like in different aspects. And again, this is something that sounds like a cultural thing. It's a culture shift that needs to happen And like you said, it sounds like it's not just, you're coming from an aspect of, it's not just outside of our community where you want the lens to change and see us from a different perspective, but also within our community.
Absolutely.
And to see us in a different way and have a different conversation, more solution based than targeting possibly victims.
Yeah. And we need to support victim survivors, whichever way um, they identify themselves. You know, I identify myself as a survivor, but once upon a time I was a victim and was trying to get on a trajectory of a survivorship. But we really do need to support survivors. And there are organizations that do support them. But there's some organizations that people are totally unaware of. And how do they get to those organizations? How do they get to the help? There are some faith organizations or faith-led organizations that do provide that support. But sometimes people don't know that within our community.
So we need to do more advocacy. This
Yeah.
is so good because um, when we think about what the trajectory is and the way the climate is, and with social media and other things, sometimes we tend to be desensitized to certain things. But as you stated, our numbers are rising. How
Mm-hmm.
can communities get involved? And I mean, I'm talking about men, but especially other women, whether they may be a survivor or a friend of a survivor and or victim. Walk us through what that looks like. What can we do to make sure that we are there to support, truly there to support? Like, what does that look like?
So I think if you have a friend or a family member that is experiencing domestic violence, and I think first of all we need to know that it's not just physical, it can be economical, it could be psychological and emotional. Also, some victims, they find themselves being taken away from their support system slowly but surely. You've been moved away. Your perpetrator or your abuser slowly takes you away from that system that you have. And I think that once you're made aware that they are becoming a victim of domestic violence, um, see how you can help them. And when I say that, ask them what do they need, and don't blame them. Don't talk bad about the abuser. Ask them what do they envision for themselves, and if they have children, what do they envision? And hey, are you on the track of what you envision for yourself? Because the last thing you want to do is to say something bad about that abuser, because that abuser is already saying things, probably in a subtle way, about all your support people. And then that's going to play into that, and find out how can you support them. And I think if they're looking to get away, don't tell nobody to leave if you cannot ensure them that you're going to help them leave, because that is the most dangerous time, is when a victim is trying to leave, because that a lot of times results into a homicide or a more critical abuse. But if you know that someone is being abused, ask them what do they envision for themselves, how can you support them, and try to support them from that. And most importantly, try to find some type of supports or organizations or shelters within that community that can assist them.
I love all of that. That is just so key. And I love the fact that you gave simple and realistic advice.
Mhm.
It doesn't take a lot, and it's age appropriate all across the board. So even with our teens, how do you feel? I'm just curious. So a lot of schools typically do not talk about DV, yet we do know if they feel like they're being bullied, they are to contact someone. But bullying is also DV in many
Mhm.
cases, especially if they're dating. So, what do you think schools need to do? And I'm just getting an opinion, it's just an opinion about what do you feel like can be some best practices, especially to bring about this awareness to our young girls, because often it starts really young, and especially in our community, we're not noticing sometimes the signs that everybody's so quote unquote busy, but at the
Mhm.
same time, our young ladies are experiencing things at a rate maybe what they've seen visually, what they watch on television, maybe what they see online. what they see maybe some of their other friends experience, and
Mhm.
that desensitivity is really impacting their decision making to stay with these young men. So prevention at a school could be key. It could be a place of neutrality to have that. So talk to us a little bit about what should schools be considering if they're looking to possibly implement that as an expansion of their bullying programs.
So I used to facilitate workshops and classes at high schools and other programs that work with teens, middle schools and high school students. And so if they didn't want to talk about gender-based violence, one of the things that we would do, we would talk about healthy relationships. And I am a firm believer, if youth and young adults are familiar with what healthy relationships look like, if they find themselves in a situation that is the direct opposite of it, they will say, hey, this doesn't feel good. So one of my favorite activities, we used to have the students have a piece of paper, blank paper, and they would just draw a big T, and four slots, four squares. One would say needs, wants, bonus, and a deal breaker. What do you need in a relationship? And we made sure that they knew it was a platonic relationship and an intimate relationship. What do you need? What do you want? And we had to distinguish the difference between a need and a want. What is a bonus and what is a deal breaker? And so as the facilitator, myself and a colleague, we would go first. So we will be, vulnerable and let them know, hey, we're not just here to judge you. And I remember I would say, I need someone that is going to respect me. And I would say, let me tell you what respect would be. I'm a little older, so, I like if a guy open a door for me. I don't want nobody, a guy going in front of me and holding a door. Can you hold a door, then let me go in, or something like that? What I want is somebody that would, greet me. Hello, Adrienne, how are you today? Or, hey, what's up? Even if it's what's up. A bonus for me is if he cooks. Like if he could cook something for me, that's pretty cool. And a deal breaker is if he smokes. If I decide to kiss him, I don't want to feel like I'm licking an ashtray, so
Right.
it was something. And so that was a way, but we also, of course, we had opportunity to dive deeper. And so sometimes we had some chuckles, but sometimes it was serious. But this was the opportunity for us to engage in what healthy relationships look like. And we wanted to hear from their point of view. And so if we could have those conversations about what healthiness look like, if they find themselves where something is questionable and they don't feel as if it's healthy, then it may be at a critical stage and they may feel I'm being bullied, and this is going in the opposite direction. And that's the
I
way sometimes to get
Oh,
that.
so good. Oh my gosh. I love that you had something workable for them. So
Mhm,
that way they could use critical thinking skills. Sounds non-intrusive.
mhm,
Sounds like you're not inserting an opinion, you're asking them to come up with what their ideas are and seeing how that makes them feel. More sensory learning. They're able to recall and call out things. But why do you feel like a lot of schools do not want to talk about it? Because that's not harming a child. That is allowing them to critically think, to critically make a decision based on the information that they are discovering on their own without indoctrinating. A lot of schools now have these things not to indoctrinate a student, right?
mhm.
So that's not indoctrinating. That is educating them on what a healthy relationship looks like, and if it's without talking about the abuser, and if it's something that they feel like that doesn't align with that, then I'm sure you all are telling them about maybe some possible next steps that can help to support them. So why is it that so many schools do not incorporate that with bullying? Because it's kind of some of the same conversation.
Yeah, I think they think sort of like they don't want us to talk about condoms or comprehensive sex education, that, we're going to talk them into going to explore. I think they want something that's going to be very positive. not realizing if we provide them with some information to protect themselves, to understand who they are and what they want, that is positive. And letting them know that they need to be a little weary about, you know, finding themselves in some compromised positions or situations, or just knowing what they want and being able to speak on what they want. One thing I found going into different educational institutions or child servicing systems is that they do not want to find themselves in situations that the educational institutions did not want to find themselves in situations where they felt like they were promoting something outside of a curriculum. You know, they just want to stick with the reading, writing, and arithmetic. They didn't really want to focus on social conversations, even though that institution is a social aspect of the students' lives.
That's a good thought process, because I do think about social emotional learning. Most schools have that day or set curriculum, but just in me thinking about it, being someone who's in direct contact with students, someone who's in direct contact with certain interventions, the conversation is more around bullying. So now that the book is out, are you able to, do you go and teach classes on the book? Do you go in and speak with book clubs? Tell us more about how you introduce your book and how do you engage others into learning more about your book.
Well, my book only been out maybe a couple of weeks.
Woo,
So
woo, woo. Congrats.
thank you. So I will, I am scheduling speaking engagements, and I will be talking with book clubs and going to some bookstores, and also scheduling some presentations about the different, I keep saying, and I'm usually not even nervous when I speak. And
Yeah, don't be scared of us. Don't be scared of us. We
yeah,
are,
and
look, we are regular folks over here. We're
yes,
everyday people
yes.
over here.
And scheduling presentations. So there's different subject matters that I talk about. So being a non-offending parent. So a lot of people are not familiar with a non-offending parent. So a non-offending parent is the parent who did not sexually abuse their child. And so unfortunately, one of our daughters was sexually abused by my ex-husband. And so when I say our daughter, all five of my children are his children. So it's not like it was some boyfriend, some guy I was messing around with. And so talking about that, and that's like having a co-occurring trauma. So I'll be talking about that. You know, some people view that as intersectionality or nexus. And so some victims of domestic violence, they're, you know, sometimes we as victims of domestic violence, we were under the impression, or some victims think that they're the only ones being abused in a home, but not realizing that there's some other abuse going on. And the research shows that, and I share that in the book. And also talking about just the violence that takes place in our community, other violence and the history of violence, and you know, wanting to have more conversations about how do we protect our community and our children, and talking about the prevention of child sexual abuse. You know, a lot of Black women and Black girls, you know, we have the history, and the data shows how many of us are being sexually abused before the age of 18. And my concern is, just the data is there, but how many of us have not shared? What about some of us who have not been polled? What does that mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So first of all, before we get you to talk about where we can find the book, don't forget to say the book, the name of the book again.
Okay.
Because this has just been so good. You've talked about the advocacy piece. You've talked about educating people on the language that needs to be used, or if someone is using that language, what does that mean? You've talked about engaging with young people to make sure that, and your experience of engaging with them, it doesn't sound like you had a negative experience. And so it is plausible to think that maybe we should think about even organizations that do bullying programs to also expand into the possibility of talking about DV because that is also a form of
Oh,
bullying. I don't know why we act like we don't understand. That is a form of bullying. Um, and so how do we access this new baby of yours, this new masterpiece of yours, this piece of literature that is going to, it's not just providing advocacy, but it's providing education and ideas of how we can better serve our community. So your book is loaded.
yes.
Even when we discussed in email, I did not realize we had such a loaded book. So this is a loaded book that we must have. So tell us more about how to acquire the book.
So my book is available on Amazon.com. You can also find it on my website, Lapis Analytics Consulting. And I will have the ebook will be available within the next week. So that's how you can find it. And I will show the copy.
Oh, I love it. It is absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you. And yes, it is loaded. So there's so many, when you think about domestic violence, gender-based violence, it does intersect with so many different areas of life. And I really wanted to cover as much as I could, because I love our community. I love women. I love children. And I just really want to make sure that I could provide as much information, resources, when it comes to victim survivors of domestic violence, and especially non-offending parents. And we need a lot of support for non-offending parents out there. I didn't even know I was a non-offending parent. And when I realized that I was a non-offending parent, I didn't realize that until after our divorce. I didn't have a lot of resources. There's some resources, but I would love for the resources to grow for non-offending parents.
That is, and it just goes to show we are still just scratching the surface of DV. I know that mental health has been really a big core subject, but it also impacts our DV impacts mental health too.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just physical or spiritual, but our mental health.
Mhm.
What are you seeing as you walk us through the process of how you describe the mental aspect? Because I'm sure that is in the book as well. So talk to us a little bit about that mental fortitude that you encourage women to have in your book.
I do have a chapter about the psychological process for myself and my children. And if you could find a counselor, and most domestic violence organizations offer them, for the victim and their children, if there was some sexual assault or child sexual abuse involved, a lot of rape crisis centers offer them. Um, and if you could find a counselor, for me as a Black woman, I really have wanted a Black counselor or therapist. My experience with a counselor that was not of my ethnicity was kind of challenging for me. Um, and the challenge came, where they would say, "Oh, you're so articulate."
Mm. Microaggressions.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and then I found myself leading the therapy session, and I'm thinking, no, no, this is not what I came here for. Um, However, I did find a counselor years later that was not Black. She was not Black, but she was a really good counselor. So mentally, I was exhausted, trying to hold it together, not just for myself, but for my children. I was a divorced mom. Well, even before I got divorced, I was working, trying to go to school, and trying to hold it together for myself and my children. And also the psychological games that my ex-husband played. So that was a lot of psychological um, strength that I needed for myself, for my children, and playing the games that he wanted to play. And so it's exhausting, and trying to balance all of that. If victims can get some type of counseling, I highly suggest it. But one thing I do know is domestic violence organizations rape crisis centers, they do offer that. And it's normally, complimentary, normally free of charge. Take advantage of that if you can.
I love how you are willing to share your truth. So first and foremost, Adrienne, thank you for sharing your truth. Your light is so bright, and your strength and your poise, the calmness in your voice, shows truly that you are a survivor. What we hope that here at Stiletto Talks that people take away from your book is your strength, because it takes a lot of strength to tell your truth and to share that with others, in hopes that it will help somebody. That is major. And we commend you, as we are highlighting authors over the next month, that we are just appreciative, number one, to have you here on the show. We're also appreciative that you are leading the way, not only in the community of domestic violence, but in our community. That is huge, because again, you are probably often marking or walking on something that is more of taboo in our community. And I think we're all aware what's understood doesn't have to be explained. Most of us know that it is taboo in our community to discuss domestic violence, because there's so-and-so, a pastor so-and-so, or you know how they are, you know how he or she, so we all know how this goes. And so the fact that you're giving a valid voice, which all voices are valid when you are talking about DV, but adding that validity, that educational piece, talking about those microaggressive aspects of it, but also talking about the healing and the process and the steps. That is so key. And we just can't thank you enough. Now your book is on Amazon too, correct?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
Yes.
Hold that book up again. We got to see it. We got to see it. We'll also make sure that on the Stiletto Talks website, we'll make sure that we also feature Growing Resilience, and make sure you all know that that's a book to get, especially as we move into this holiday season. We all know that some of these situations can be heightened, and we all just need to make sure that we're doing our best to take care of one another in situations like this. And as Adrienne said, please make sure that when you're giving advice, that you're educated enough to give said advice. Do not just give someone advice like, oh, leave right now, oh, do something this or do that, and you know that you may not be educated enough to support or equipped to support that person.
Yes.
We certainly don't want anyone to fall in that, and for you to have support guilt because maybe you didn't do all that you were supposed to do, or you felt like you didn't because you didn't have the knowledge that you needed to handle that situation for your the person that needed that support. Adrienne, we are just again so glad to have you. We thank you for being on Stiletto Talks. Those of you who are listening, those of you who are looking on YouTube, these are the type of stories we continue to bring. We are continuing our Authors Month, and making sure that you are aware of authors to watch out for, and Adrienne Spires is certainly that. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you so much.